Niall, welcome to the Patient Paradox podcast.
Thank you so much. Great to see you both again.
You too.
Great to see you.
How are you?
I'm good. I had a dip in the sea this morning, so I feel full of life. I feel ready to go.
Yeah, you really do practice what you preach, don't you?
I was talking to somebody yesterday. They were having a chat about the new book, and they were saying, we can really tell that you walk the walk. And it's like, but I kind of have to. I always feel like I have to, you know.
Yeah.
Years ago when I went off to train with Wim Hof for the first time, I'd never done an ice bath. And I jumped into an ice bath in his house and he jumped in beside me and it was like this shocking experience. The ice bath was shocking and Wim being there was shocking. And at that point I thought to myself, oh, I really need to understand this deeply. So I came home and did an ice bath every day for 100 days and never stopped, you know. But I just feel that for me, the type of person I am, I have to really live it. I have to really understand the depths of something before I can share it with somebody, before I can teach it with somebody.
Totally, yeah.
So I suppose when I got to know of you and Amy as well, and probably a lot of people, it's knowing this persona, Breathe with Niall, and the work you do, the Wim Hof, the breath work. But what I'd be very interested in at the start is to actually understand who Niall is, and if you could kind of paint a picture of the journey to get to this point and the work that you're doing.
Yeah, I suppose this morning is very relevant to that. So I'm from Pummarnock and I spent my youth on the beach in Pummarnock. My first memories are running on the beach there. And that beach has always been a part of the different stages of my life. So growing up in Pummarnock, I jumped into the sea a lot off High Rock, really loved the cold. But then my emphasis changed and I was obsessed with playing basketball and obsessed with being like a professional basketball player. So I used to train on the beach, and this is now, these are very young, this is before maybe these are teenagers, but back in the 90s, early 90s, when you trained outside, like I used to run on the beach and do sprints and everything, and people would shout at you, like, what are you doing? You know, it was kind of unusual to be on the beach training. But that kind of drive to learn how to be really good at something. So I played for Ireland and all those things. But that kind of drive to learn how to be really good at something is something that can stayed with me then. And then after a while, the beach again, coming into it, when I'd stand on the beach, I'd ask myself these questions on the beach, you know, what is this all about? You know, who am I and who are you? And you know, this, you look at the sea, this vastness of the sea, and you think to yourself, you know, what's the significance of humans? You know, what is the meaning of all of this? So I'd stand on the beach and ask those questions, even as a young basketball player. And eventually those questions became so loud in my voice, the voice, you know, within me, that I had to leave behind ambitions of being a basketball player, leave it all behind and go off and look for those answers. So that led me to martial arts, to yoga, to breathing, to meditation, to, you know, where I am now, sitting in front of you, those questions in my mind, trying to figure out those answers. That's why I'm here in front of you today. And the summary of all that is, I don't know the answers still, but I'm still looking.
Still learning. And from that young guy who obviously was quite introspective and deep from a young age, then did you go into like a normal work career before you ended up, I suppose, in the broader wellness space?
So I went, my degree in UCD is in English and history of art. So I went there, and after that I didn't know what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to do something with words and communication and writing. So I went to the University of Westminster in London and did a degree in a master's in journalism, knowing that I didn't want to be a journalist, but knowing that I wanted to be able to communicate with people. So that was 1999. So when I came out of university, the internet was a thing then. It wasn't when I started. And my first job was for a website, and I was a writer for the website, writing articles about health and fitness and things like that. And that was then my career from that point on, was creating what we now call content for websites, but back then it was like writing blog posts.
You were the OG wellness blogger.
Back in the day, like really back in the day. And that's where I was sitting at a desk here writing about, eating mindfully, even it wasn't called that, it was called slowly eating. And then Josie, my wife, sat down at the next desk and she was the picture editor. That's where we met in my very first job. And there Josie was. And but it gave me the skills. So it was always involved in the internet. This was pre-social media. So it gave me a great understanding of how the internet works, and led me to some amazing jobs in London and just fascinating, kind of meeting fascinating people. But all that time, I was studying breathing. I was trying to learn how the body healed itself. I was learning meditation. I was experimenting with martial arts and yoga, and that was bubbling up as the career was to pay the bills, but behind that was the passion and the exploration of what it is to be human, what it is to try and find this balance in ourselves. And over time, then I started to teach a little bit of that, but no one that was ever coming. It was never paying the bills. It was just the thing that I loved doing. And then slowly that began to change. Slowly the job became less important and the passion became bigger and stronger. And then it became the livelihood then. It became the way to live.
And that search for meaning, where do you think that comes from? Do you think that's just innate in you, or is that?
I don't know. When we were getting married, Josie and I were getting married, my dad had this hilarious speech at the wedding, and he had said to me that we lived in America in the mid-'80s. We emigrated for 3 years to America, and he said I was maybe 9, and he told a story that I was sitting at the kitchen table eating this like mountain of Rice Krispies one morning in America. And I turned to him and said, I wonder where the woman I will marry is right now. And I was 9.
That's intense. That's intense.
Yeah, so Dad was saying he was always a strange man, So I think I always had that inclination to think deeply about things and to maybe think in a little more abstract way. I don't know. It's hard to tell how other people think, but the meaning behind things always fascinated me. The mysteries of life always fascinated me. That's why I love science, because it's trying to unravel the mysteries, and it's nearly like the more science unravels them, the deeper the mystery becomes nearly. So, and that's just the way I have been.
Your parents though must have like fostered a bit of a culture of this, like growing up as well, I assume.
Yeah, Mum and Dad were very open. They're like old hippies, and there's pictures of Mum doing yoga when she was 17, like way back, and Dad always was into Tai Chi. So as I was growing up, the house, they're musicians as well, so the house was full of music, traditional Irish music, but it was also full of books on yoga and meditation and Tai Chi and herbalism. It was all there all the time. Now, of course, as a young teenager, I pushed it all the way, because it was basketball was the main thing, and you have to rebel against that stuff. But like when I was going out to play a basketball match, Mom would say to me, "Now use your third eye to visualize your performance." Now, I say, "Mom, for God's sake, what are you talking about?" But then when I got into the Irish setup, now this is still early 90s, so visualization or mental rehearsal was not really used in sports science much back then, but we had an amazing coach, and he used to have us visualize our international matches before we did them, which worked amazingly well. But my mom was also saying that, but in a different way, using a different set of languages. So yes, it was a house that was very open to all of that. And I look back at it now and really, I always say I'm so grateful to my parents for being like that. They were the exact parents that I needed at that time.
Love that. Niall actually really reminds me of Emmett,
my
Fergus's brother. Yeah, just very similar story, like real deep thinker. And we've had a few situations before where people have said like, so Emmett has a kombucha company. People have said, one brother selling kombucha, one brother selling CBD. Your parents must have been such hippies.
And they weren't. Well, The older I get, the more I realize they probably had that in them a little bit
Yes.
as the stories come out.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't have said they were
At the time.
At the time, they were hippie.
Well, now you think hippie's cool, but like back
Yeah.
then maybe.
No,
you
I when you were saying you were doing all that, I was like, who were your influencers, or who?
Yeah.
But it's clear, obviously, it was your parents, because
Yeah.
the meditation, the breath work, like 20, 30 years ago, like that wasn't mainstream
No,
as it is
not at
today.
all.
So
Not at all.
it really came from the home.
And how do you, I'm curious to know, how do you introduce yourself to someone now? Like if someone asks, what do you do? What do you say?
I have narrowed it down to a very simple thing. I just say that I teach people how to breathe.
Okay.
That's it. Which, of course, is only one tiny fraction of it. But if we
Yeah.
actually got into it, it'd be like, what? What?
Yeah. I like
that.
What?
Yeah.
And that came about because we have 4 children, Josie and I, and the 2 youngest are identical twin girls. And they were in school and they were talking about what their parents did. And their teacher had bought my first book, The Blissful Breath. So she knew what I did and she'd been to some of our events. And she said to our girls, so what does your dad do? And they both looked at each other and they said, he's an accountant. They were so embarrassed at what I do. So now they're a little bit less embarrassed. But yeah, teaching people how to breathe is about
Okay.
as good as it gets.
But you do have many other strings to your bow, which
Yeah.
we'll get to. So if we start with very, very simple breathing, breath work, why do we breathe?
It's an amazing question. So it's probably the most fundamental element of being human is breathing. So it's essential to everything within the body. We can't live without the breath. And even at that, it goes back to the very beginning of our lives. So when we're in the womb, and this is an experience that we all share, no matter what happens afterwards, our mother is providing us with everything. She's even breathing for us. But in the process of being born, everything changes. So we emerge into the world still not breathing. It's the cold on our skin that shocks the body into taking its first breath. So right from the beginning, there's a relationship between the cold and the breath. And that first breath opens the lungs, ignites life in us, kicks off this chain reaction that actually gives us our life, brings us to life. And so from the very beginning, the breath is there as the beginning of everything. It's also the last thing that we do. And in between that last breath and that first breath, our breathing is with us all the time. It's a part of every experience we have, the good experiences, the bad experiences. Our breathing reflects how we feel. Our breathing reflects how we think. So it's this fundamental part of being a human. And it has obviously biological reasons. It keeps us alive in every way. But there's much, much deeper part of it as well.
Mm-hmm. So I think like there's probably people who are a little bit skeptical with this whole breath work practice. Before we get into that, looking at the everyday unconscious breathing, can you explain like what is healthy versus unhealthy in terms of unconscious breathing?
So we breathe about 20,000 times a day without thinking about it, which is great. Because if, when we have this ability, it's one of the few things we have the ability to just leave alone and it works by itself. And then we can actually pay attention to it and we can improve it and we can enhance it. When we're talking about breathing, I don't really like to talk about, one way being bad or good or right or wrong. Because I think the body has such wisdom in it that whatever way we're breathing is the way we kind of need to breathe in that moment. So sometimes when we're under stress, for example, our breathing becomes quite shallow and out of balance. And again, we're not conscious of it. It's just breathing really rapidly. Now, that's not good for us in the long term. Mm-hmm. But in that moment, it might be what we need to generate a little bit more energy, a little bit more activity in the body to deal with whatever it is that's causing us stress. But I think the difficulty is then that if we don't have some practice to bring us back down out of that, that's what starts to cause all the problems. You know from your own work as well, how when the body is in a state of stress or emergency, that it can't rebuild itself. It's just they're dealing with the stress or dealing with that perceived danger. So in order for us to come back down out of that and for the body to rebuild itself and to restore itself, we have to be able to do something about that. And the breath is one of the most effective ways of getting us from a state of agitation, a state of survival, back down into the parasympathetic part of the nervous system where we feel safe again, where we feel calm again. So a great way for people to do that, to go back to the start of your question, is by practicing calm, slow breathing, even for a minute or two every day. Firstly, it brings us back down out of that state if we are in that heightened state of anxiety or worry. But it also then starts to reprogram us. So then our breathing, when we're not conscious of it, starts to become a little bit calmer, a little bit slower as well. So it's like the way in which we breathe when we're not thinking about it is dictated by the pressures that we feel. So if a person is on holidays and they're not feeling any pressure and there's no stress and there's no to-do lists, their breathing will tend to be soft and calm. But when we're going about our day, the pressures we feel kind of program us in how to breathe. The great thing about that is we can reprogram ourselves all the time. So if we decide, okay, I'm feeling kind of my levels of anxiety or worry are too high, I need to do something about it. Breathing is a great way to change how they feel in that moment. But by practicing breathing slowly and calmly, it also reprograms them how they breathe when they're not conscious of it as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So it's like we want to do a little bit of practice on the mat, or and that then influences those other 20,000 breaths we're taking the rest of the day as well.
Mm-hmm. I can totally relate because just this summer, I don't practice breathwork every day. I'm going to put my hands up and admit it.
That's what most people don't. It's all right.
Try to do it at least once a week at a minimum. But during the summer there, we were launching our new website and I didn't think I was stressed at the time, but I probably was, or just busy, and simultaneously training for the half marathon. And out of nowhere, I went out for a run one day and I was running up the hill in Phoenix Park and I was like basically hyperventilating at the top of the hill. I do this run like 3 or 4 times a week and I've never had issue. But my breath caught me and was like telling me like something is wrong. And I rang you and you were like, I would just stop. You're just giving out. You just don't want to do the half marathon. You're trying to get out of it.
There's always something.
But that actually continued for like 3 or 4 weeks and it really disrupted my training. But I spoke to a physio friend of mine and she was like, are you stressed? And I was like, I don't think I am. And she was like, I bet you are. Your body is in overdrive and you can't breathe effectively to get you through the run because the run is putting further stress on your body, right? But you can't meet those demands. So to get me back to a more kind of grounded, neutral place, slowed down the training. I did practice a little bit of breath work in the mornings to try and slow the breath down. And within about a week, I had kind of turned it around. But I thought that was interesting because I had identified that nearly my breath was the communicator in that case. It was telling me that I needed to slow down.
That is an amazing example of what we were talking about there. That there is a relationship, there's a two-way relationship between us, whoever we are, and the breath. And it's so, for example, when somebody jumps into the cold, their breath is telling them everything they need to know. They lose their breath. They can't get their breath. How they come out of that is that they start focusing on the exhale. And in that moment, like you experienced, your breath tells you where you are. Your breath tells you if it's too much, like when you're running at the top of the hill and your body is saying, I actually can't get enough oxygen down into the cells to deal with what's going on, because we're already in a state of agitation from the stress from the website, and your body was talking to you. Your breath is telling you. So the breath is this amazing. If we take time to listen to it, it'll tell us what's going on inside us. It'll tell us if in the moment you're in a meeting and something's happening, and a person is saying, "Okay, I'm just going to pay attention to my breath for a second." The breath being quick and out of sync will show them, okay, slow it down, or if they're really calm already, they'll know from their breath. So if we take a moment, like in yoga, they talk about that when the mind and the breath are together, then there's no fluctuations in the mind. Everything's peaceful. So when we pay attention to the breath, everything kind of comes together for that moment. Now, we can't spend our whole day paying attention to the breath, but when we do, we can hear what's going on in the body a lot clearer.
For someone who's like very new to breathwork and the practice, I've done like different types of meditation. I think dabbled in different types of breathwork. Is breathwork an umbrella term for multiple different types of practice? And how does it differ from meditation, if at all?
Yeah, so breathwork, it's a phrase now that means, you know, all the different types of practices of breathing.
Okay.
And there are millions of them. There are literally millions. Even in yoga, there are volumes and volumes and volumes of different types of ways of breathing, and that's just in yoga. The way it differs from meditation is, in a way, we could argue that all meditation is trying to focus on one thing, so everything else falls away. And anyone who tries to meditate, I try to meditate every day, it's a wrestling match with your mind, you know, because the mind wants to run away over here and you're trying to pull it back and all these things. Eventually, after about 10, 15 minutes of meditation, 20 minutes of meditation, we feel our nervous system start to unwind a little bit, and we can get to a place where we feel very relaxed, and we might have forgotten that we're meditating, or we're not following the thoughts as much. In breathing practices, you can get to that same place really quickly without all the wrestling with your mind. Because some people lie down and they say, I can't meditate, which is grand. We're only moving our lungs in a very specific way. That's all it is. And by moving them in a very specific way, it brings about these changes in the body. So our brain, right now, our three brains here, are receiving trillions of messages every moment from our bodies about everything. The messages it pays most attention to, gives most priority to, are the ones from the lungs. Because if the lungs start to get in trouble, the whole body is finished. So the brain listens to the lungs really clearly. So when we're doing our breathing practice, if we're moving our lungs in a very calm way, then those messages go to the brain starts to send the messages to the rest of the body, everything's okay. So we can get to the same state of deep clarity from breathing in a much quicker way than we can with meditation. So breathing works for everybody because we're built to do it. Everyone is built to do it. It's like a little shortcut to those moments of clarity and peace that we might get from meditation. And so loads of people can't meditate, or it's too much to meditate, but they can do some breathing. So it's also a very good way to prepare to do your meditation, to get the body in a state from doing your daily stuff and then sitting down. The breathing calms the body down. It starts to help the mind process things, and then it's easier to start the wrestling match with the mind in the meditation then.
Yeah, I find the same. Like, it gives you a focus that's hard. Meditation to me is like you're sitting in silence and you're really trying to calm that mind. Whereas with a lot of the breathwork practices, you're focusing on something, your breath. So yeah, I think it's easier for the mind.
Because you can feel it.
Because you can feel it, yeah. And without even knowing, then, you know, you're a few minutes in and you're really just focusing on that one thing, which is, I suppose, what we're trying to do.
And you can, what I love about the breathing practices as well, is that you can let the mind drift to wherever it needs to go. So in meditation, obviously, we're trying to hold the mind in a position or surrender the mind in a position. And with breathing, we can just keep breathing and keep breathing, and the mind can start to go through whatever it needs to go through. That's why it can be sometimes quite emotional for people, because emotions can come up, or they might even understand why they're feeling a certain way. But it's like the breathing; it just gives us a space to do whatever we need to do, and we don't have to be dogmatic about it. We can just breathe for 10 minutes, just follow a guided breathing session. You know, use my app, use someone else's app, listen to something, listen to some music for a minute, and just breathe, and it just changes how we feel. It's nearly instantaneous.
In terms then of the power of breathwork, so I think about it like you're going from that unconscious every day, as you said, like 20,000 times a day, we're just naturally breathing, to this conscious practice and like putting the breath to work. For people who start to practice and use the different techniques, what kind of health impacts do they experience, or what kind of benefits can we see?
So one of the first things that people notice most is the reduction in stress. So they feel calm. After a few minutes of breathing, you just feel calm. So immediately that starts to have impact on their health. So for a lot of people, 5 or 10 minutes of breathing every day, it reduces stress, reduces anxiety. Their health starts to improve because their immune system gets better, because it's not up in fight or flight. It's getting what it needs. It can reduce inflammation. It can help with sleep. It give us more energy, because there's more oxygen getting down into the cells, into the mitochondria. The engines are in the cells are working better. So, we could argue that breathing is part of the solution, part of the answer to nearly all the problems that we face. It's not the entire solution, but it is definitely part of the solution. And it's probably the thing that we forget about most. When you think about how much time we spend thinking about what we eat, and if we took eating out of the equation, like the human body would cease to exist after a couple of weeks of eating. And likewise, drinking. We spend so much time thinking about what we drink and hydration. And again, if we took that out of the equation, we'd cease to exist in a few days. But we're breathing. It's so fundamental, so important to us. If we stop breathing, a minute or two, we'd be done. That's in the hierarchy of how important it is to us, to our health, to feeling like we do. Breathing is the most important factor. But it's the one that we pay least attention to.
Is it because it's like, so for me, breathing is tangible, like I can feel it and I do it. But as you say there, like our food, our drink, exercise, like those things probably feel a little bit more tangible to most people, because they're objects, or you can touch them or see them. You can't see the breath. I know you can feel it, but maybe because it's always there.
We think about it less.
Yeah.
And we're not marketed to on our
Yeah.
breath.
Not yet.
Not yet. But you're trying that.
No, but I think you're right. I think this is something that I struggled with for years, because when I first started teaching, I remember thinking to myself, oh, well, of course, it would be no bother for people to sit down and do a little bit of breathing every day. It might be more appealing than jumping in a cold shower, for example, or jumping in the sea. But what I found was that those tangible things, like jumping into the cold, even though they're more difficult, are the things that people gravitate towards. And taking a few moments to breathe every day is actually nearly impossible to get people to do that. And I think it's partly because, like you say, it's not as tangible. But I think there's a deeper biological reason as well, is that because we're built to breathe without thinking about it, part of our brain is saying to us, I'm doing this already.
Right.
Don't worry about it. So I think there's an inbuilt resistance in us to sit down and do a bit of breathing, because our body is saying, we're already doing this. Spend your energy somewhere else. But that's my mission, is to try and get people to spend even a moment or two breathing a little bit more every day.
And it's such a shame, because like I know for myself, even like I know it's good for me. Like there's no need to convince me here. I just don't make the time for it. And I find then when I do get to the points in my life where maybe I'm a little bit more stressed than usual, I'm like, okay, today I'm going to practice breath work. And I'm like, why haven't I been doing that the last 5 weeks or like the last forever? So that I maybe wouldn't get to this point, or I'd be way more able to cope with it. Like, why is it in times of like deep stress that then we're more open to these kind of, I don't even like saying alternative methods, fundamental methods of stress reduction or improving our health?
Because we're desperate. In those moments where we're like, I will do anything to help myself. What will I do to reduce how I'm feeling and to feel like myself again? I think it's in those moments we're more open to it. But on the other side of it as well, we also have to be kind to ourselves. we don't have time to do everything.
Yeah.
You know, in our lives, we have all these great things that we want to do. And when we talk about another technique or another technique, everyone's like, oh my God, I already have to do intermittent fasting. I already have to do this. I have to do my exercise. You know, so over the years, I have also softened on this as well. And you know, if people can do a little bit of breathing, great. If you only come to it when you need it, that's okay as well. You know, what we're trying to do is, Josie and I, we're trying to give people as many options as we can. So when it comes time to do it, that they can have an option. So maybe it's a book, they read a book and that teaches them. Maybe they listen to the podcast and they do a free breathing session that way, or maybe they use the app or whatever it is. But just to give people whatever they need in that moment. And if that's the only ever time you ever use it, that's okay as well.
Mm-hmm.
On that point, the preventative versus the desperate situation, from a practical perspective for people, does the kind of techniques that you would advise that say someone should do every morning as a preventative measure that really regulates the body and like over time you're going to see great results, does that differ from someone who's at work, feels like they've got punched in the gut with some stress from their boss, for example, and they're in that state we've all been in, that hyper stress state, the blood levels are gone up, you're feeling that heat in your face. Would you advise on different techniques for those different types of moments? Or
I try to keep it as simple as possible.
Okay.
And I try to encourage people to practice what they actually will have to use. You know, so the breath in that situation when we're just under overwhelming pressure, the breath that we use there is just trying to focus on a long, slow exhale.
Okay.
As simple as that. We will always inhale. You know, we don't have to worry about that. It's trying to find, it's that feeling of like, if something happens, people always go, and you can see the body moving up into fight or flight. And then what we need to do is, and repeat that long, slow exhale. So like with anything, it's like goes back to playing basketball all those years ago. I would shoot like thousands of shots. So when it came to the game, I had it. So it's like this, we just practice that long exhale away from the crisis. Mm-hmm. And then when the crisis happens, we have it. You know, so in a way, that's where the preventative stuff, the preventative breathing is brilliant because it improves our health, it improves our mood, it makes us better and stronger. But it's also preparing us for the crisis. So when the crisis comes, we know how to breathe. Okay. We know how to use it. So it's like a double advantage. We're getting all the advantages of just doing it. And then we're getting the advantage that it's there for us when we need it.
That's one goal for me now after this podcast is preventative breathing.
Yeah. Do you want to do a little bit of that breathing now? Just like a few breaths like that?
Please, yeah, let's do it.
Okay. So, and for everyone listening, if you want to close your eyes just for a second. And I want you to focus on your eyes. Bring your attention to your eyes and just soften your eyes. Bring your attention to your jaw and your mouth. Just soften your jaw and your mouth. See if you can soften your shoulders and your neck. Softening the arms and the fingers. And even softening the belly. And just bring your attention now to your breath as it is. No changing the breath yet. Just listening, just become aware of your breath. Just noticing how it moves in the body. And on your next inhale, gently breathing in and slowly breathing all the way out. And when you get to the bottom, just breathing in again and breathing all the way out. And just continue to breathe like this, focusing on these long, slow exhales. The body is soft as you breathe. There's no tension in the breath. There's no tension in the body. Finding your own rhythm. Just focusing on these long, slow exhales. And on your next exhale, see can you soften the body as you exhale. And we'll do 3 more like this. Every time you exhale, you're softening a little more, letting the body go a little more. 2 more. And really letting go as you exhale. The last one, breathing in and breathing out. And just keeping your eyes closed for a moment and allowing your breath to return to its natural rhythm. And when you're ready, you can blink your eyes back open again and come back into the studio. So that very simple way of breathing focuses on these long exhales, triggering the vagus nerve, the back of the brain that runs down into all the major organs in the body. One of the main jobs of the vagus nerve is to take us from a state of stress or agitation or fear and bring us down to a place where we feel safe and calm again. And the way we do that is through these long, slow exhales. So we can practice that like that. And how do you feel now after doing it?
Great.
I feel great.
Yeah.
And like what you said earlier, is that something you teach around the awareness of the breath? Because you said earlier, the breath really tells you where you are. And
The breath tells you
where you are, which I find fascinating. Even there, I feel like I have a little bit more tension than I might have in normal because, you know, we're doing a podcast. It's a bit outside my comfort zone.
Yeah.
And I know from when I'm running and stuff, like without any iPhone watchers telling me, straight away, if I tune into how I'm breathing, you know, it's telling me this morning you're not really feeling your 100%, you need to ease back or whatever. So I think that's a very important message for people if they can start to be aware, whether they're in that stressful state or whatever is going on in their lives, that if they just start to tune in a little bit more regularly, how am I breathing? That's maybe where the good change can come from.
And it's an amazing practice because, again, we're focusing on the breath. And that then allows the mind to forget about everything else for a few moments. And that's the beauty of meditation, is that whether we're focusing on the breath or a candle or a visualization, we forget about everything for those few moments. And the mind just gets a chance to reset itself. So even a person becoming aware of their breath at work, at home, wherever it is, it starts to change the breath. The more we, even the moment of when we start to take control of that breath, it immediately starts to slow down. It changes how we feel in that moment. We forget about the other things for a moment as well. So there's so many deep benefits to just paying attention to the breath. And as you said, it'll tell us where we are.
Love that.
Nice. So obviously a huge part of your work as well is the water and cold water immersion. As you've already mentioned a few times, like that's so connected to the breath as well. They're very complementary. Can you tell us a little bit more about your work with the water?
Yeah, the cold is a powerful force. And in this part of the world, it's, even if a person likes or dislikes the cold, it's something we have to learn to deal with. You know, and so my work is often helping people who hate the cold to really try to embrace it and to use the cold as a force for good in their life, as this thing that can enrich their day. And for people who already get into the cold, my work with them is to try and help them get more from their experience, you know, get more meaning, but also more benefits, a profounder experience from the effort that they're putting into the cold. And in this part of the world particularly, there's no escaping the cold. You know, there's a great phrase in Irish that says the cold follows you to the door, but the damp follows you to bed. You know, and so whether or not people like the cold, it's following you inside, especially in this country. So, you know, the winters here are unusual. They mightn't be -10, but they feel like it because the wind and the moisture in the air.
So discover Ireland at this.
So that's why when I'm talking to other Wim Hof instructors who might be from really cold places, we kind of joke that the cold is colder here in Ireland than it is. I've been in -20 degrees in the snow in a pair of shorts, and it feels cold, but it's dry. When you're standing on the cliffs of Moher in your shorts in February, you know, it is different. It is different. So in this part of the world, whether or not someone likes it, the cold is a presence in their life. So either we learn to embrace it and to use it as a force for good, or we become very miserable for a long part of the time. And it goes back as well to that, the story I was telling about at that moment when we were born and this connection between the breath and the cold. All of us had that experience of the cold shocking us into taking our first breath. All of us. For some of us then, we spend the rest of our lives pushing the cold away. And really what the exploration in my new book, The Power of the Cold, is about, it's a kind of asking that question, what happens if we keep continuously to push the cold away? Is the cold the thing that makes us feel whole again? Is the cold the thing that teaches how to be calm in difficult situations? Is the cold necessary for us to feel healthy and strong again? Because it is there at the very beginning. And if we deny it and push it away, are we not whole again until we kind of embrace it? And I think what we can see now from all the science and all the kind of evidence is that we do need a bit of cold in our life. Like everything, we need the heat and the cold. We need the dark and the light. Our lives are full of these opposing forces that we need to embrace to find a balance. And that's why I think the cold is so important.
Mm-hmm. A bit more on why we need the cold and how we go about seeking the cold. Like, what do you mean by that? Is it, jumping into the freezing cold water, or is it just enough to expose yourself to the cold outside every day? Is it grounding?
There is loads of ways that we can do it. So for some people, jumping into the sea or an ice bath is too much. And it is too much for some people. Mm-hmm. That's fair enough. So we start small, and we start at a place where anyone can start. So let's say you wash your hands today in your nice hot water and you use your soap, and at the end just turn it to cold and feel the cold water in your hands and try and examine how it feels and how you react to it. And then the next time you wash your hands again, use hot water and soap, but at the end turn it to cold again. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to understand our relationship with the cold, and we're trying to change our relationship with the cold. We're trying to help ourselves understand that we can embrace it. So even something as small as that can start to change our understanding of the cold and start to generate in us these amazing benefits of the cold. So for example, one benefit of the cold, science shows us that when we get into the cold, let's say in a cold shower, after a hot shower, or in the sea, or wherever it is, or even some cold on our hands, inflammation starts going down in the body, but it continues to go down in the body if we approach the cold in the right way for about 6 days afterwards. Like 6 days. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, it's amazing.
It balances our hormones. It improves our circulation. There's research coming out of Cambridge as well, showing Cambridge University shows that it can protect against dementia. Nearly every month there is new research coming out to show us how amazing the cold is for us. So my work is to try and help people, even if they hate the cold, to try and find a way that works for them. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's you just take your jacket off and you walk to the shop and back, and that's enough.
Yeah.
Or maybe for some people are always saying to me, geez, I find it cold getting into the swimming pool on holidays, but maybe that's where they start,
We always have this conversation with our friends. My best friend Shauna, like, she would never, ever, ever get into the Irish Sea. And whenever we're away with them, like, she'll get into the pool wherever we are. Fergus and I see it as like a jacuzzi, but for her it's cold.
Yeah, different levels.
Yeah, and we perceive cold differently, and women and men perceive cold differently. Yeah. And, depending on different times of the month, everything is different. So a person's perception of the cold is really different. So it's trying to find a place for them to begin from.
Yeah.
And then from there to try and change their understanding of the cold a little bit. Mm-hmm. They don't have to love the cold, but just knowing that they can use their breath to be able to deal with the cold a little bit better. And when they do that, then they're generating all these amazing benefits deep down inside them as well.
Mm-hmm. I love your ethos, pardon the pun, and how you communicate the benefits of your practices is like starting small, because I think sometimes with Instagram you can see so many videos, reels, TikToks, whatever, of these people who go to the extremes, which you have done, and there are obviously profound benefits there, but sometimes maybe that can be a deterrent to the everyday person to getting into these kinds of practices. But to hear about the research that there are still benefits to be found from these small micro practices that we can all apply to our everyday, like that's that's brilliant, and I love that you're communicating that, and you're breaking it down, keeping it simple, and making it easy for everyone. And I know from reading your first book, that was definitely the case. Like, we got so much benefit out of that, like 10-minute practices every single day. Your new book, The Power of Cold, can you tell us anything about that yet?
Yes, of course. In fact, we've been talking about it the whole time.
We've basically read the book without reading the book.
Again, for me, it's very important that it's for everyone. So for the person who hates the cold like that, there's loads of ways in which we can use the cold. As you said, these micro practices that can have a huge benefit on us. But then the book shows us this path down into the cold. There's a very specific path into the cold that has huge benefits. And it doesn't matter what practice we're using it for. The first part of the path into the cold is the chaos that we feel. Anybody who's felt the cold knows that shock, the chaos, and that's just part of the process. We want to put ourselves into that so we can learn how to come out of it. So it's like training. So we put our hands in the cold, or we get into the cold shower, or we go to the sea, or we take our jacket off. And we feel that shock, we feel that chaos. And then we learn to use our breathing to bring ourselves out of that. So we start to take control of the breath. The control of the breath then, once we have control of the breath, we can calm the breath down. And this is the same in our hands in the water. We feel the shock of it. Our breathing goes out of sync. If we can control the breath and then calm the breath, we are actually learning how to deal with extreme stress. We are learning how to deal with shock and chaos. So the book is about teaching people how to move along this path from chaotic situations to feeling a little bit in control, and then to find this sense of calm in the cold, but also at work, also at home. The cold is teaching us how to deal with pressures of all sorts. So within the book, we have there's a whole way that described for people to start small and to continue on and find ways that they can practice, ultimately to get them to a place where they feel that the cold is enriching their day, that the cold is a force for good, and they've embraced it, and they know how to use it. But again, it's also within the context of listening to our bodies, and knowing when's enough. Because, as you said, like this, Instagram is full of loads of crazy stuff, which is, it's there to grab people's attention. But we have to respect the cold. When we go to the cold always wins. So there's no forcing or pushing in the cold. So when I get into, I was glad when I went to the beach today because there was no one around. So if I go for a swim, nearly every time I get out of the water, and I'm not joking, nearly every time I get out of the water, somebody says to me, "You weren't in for very long." Because they expect me to be in there for hours, But really with the cold, you don't need much. You need a small amount of cold to have these big effects. And sometimes people get caught up in the egotism of competition, like, well, I spent 20 minutes or 10 minutes.
That's happening now, isn't it? Every February you stay in for 1
Freezeberry.
minute on the freezeberry, 1 minute on the first day. Like, people are coming out with hypothermia, and
Yeah.
it's turned into an ego pursuit rather than what it's designed to be.
The cold is a very strong force, and we have to pay it the most respect when we go in there. And our approach always has to be like that. When we lose respect for the cold, it comes and gets us. And that can be dangerous for people if they stay too long in the sea. So the whole approach of the book is listening to the body, never forcing, and knowing that less is more. You don't need a long time in the cold to get all the benefits from it. So the book teaches people how to do that and teaches people to know when's enough and to listen to their body. It's like we were talking with the breath. If we're listening to the breath, it'll tell us where we are. Likewise, the breath will tell us where we are in the cold as well.
I think, like, what I'm hearing there with the cold and trying to be calm within that chaos, it's all about is building this resilience.
Yes.
And life is hard. Like, there's no getting away from it. And I think the world is even getting harder for kids and stuff. So people are going to have to learn how to build a bit of mental, physical resilience. Like, that's just, I think, needs to be a key part of your DNA. I understand that's harder for some people than others, and there's a lot of factors that play with it, but just pushing yourself to those little chaotic moments,
Yeah.
but ones that like you've decided to put yourself in, like the cold, for example,
Yeah.
and learn how to deal with those situations, breathe, regain your balance. I just think they're vital little micro things people need to bring into their lives to start to build that resilience, because as I said, like there's no getting away from the stresses that we're all under, but how we manage them is just going to be key.
That's it. The cold teaches us that. You know, the cold teaches us how to be resilient. And every time we get into the cold, and again, it only has to be a small little thing. It's a victory. Our body then learns from it and prepares for the next time. So the next time mightn't be cold. The next time might be a terrible email or a difficult situation, but the body has learned from the cold how to find calm and balance in it. So it's also learned how to be resilient the next time something happens. So for example, my mom's health hasn't been great the last couple of years. So I was working with her in the cold. And so her practice is that she walks down to the beach in Portmarnock, takes her shoes and socks off, puts her feet in the water, and she walks in the sea for a minute or two, and then she walks back home. So it has to meet the person where they are.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Not everyone wants to jump in an ice bath. Not everyone wants to jump in the sea or whatever it is. But there are many ways in which we can use the cold to build resilience, to build health, to build ability to deal with whatever the pressure we are facing is.
Mm-hmm. And how are you fostering this culture within your own home with your kids? I got an email. I'm obviously signed up to your newsletter. I got an email from you this week about how there was a bit of chaos at home and you had to sit the kids down and do a 3-minute practice. Is it part of your everyday as a family?
Yeah, absolutely. I think humans learn really quickly by mimicking. You know, we mimic our parents a lot, whether we like it to think it or not. So for Josie and I, this is how we live. So they just know, they just mimic how we live. But also as they're getting older, the sitting everyone down, okay, and we're all doing 3 minutes of breathing is becoming more essential as they become teenagers.
Mm-hmm.
And even the cold. So when they're really young, children are madly curious about the cold. So allowing the children to run free without a coat and shoes or whatever what they want to do is a big part of parents allowing the children to enjoy the cold. But as our children got a little bit older, they'd have their hot shower and we'd say, okay, now spray a little bit of cold on your feet. And they'd spray a little cold on their feet. And then they'd want to spray a little bit more and so on and so forth. So it gets to the point now where our 2 teenage boys now after training, they'll have a hot shower, and they'll turn it to cold and they'll do their breathing in the cold shower. And that's just become part of their routine. Now, we never forced them. There was never any kind of force. But it was also always there. If they felt they needed it, I would tell them how to do it. Now it's an essential part of their own self-care practice. If they're feeling overwhelmed, and teenage boys are full of hormones and they're full of anger, my oldest lad might say to me, he's 14, I'm just going to go upstairs and jump in the cold shower for 10 seconds. Because he knows that the person that goes in is different to the person that comes out. And with children and teenagers, what I've found is for the breathing and the cold, they don't need very much. They don't need to be as convinced as us hung up adults do about it. They just feel it and it just works for them and they feel different.
It's interesting because if I actually think about it, if you're ever at any swim spot, like when we're swimming in Galway at Salt Hill or at the 40 foot, like it's always the adults are like hesitant holding on to the bar, getting in, while the kids are like, excuse me, can you move out of the way? And they're jumping in, they're jumping out, jumping in, jumping out, not a bother on them. I even see it with my own nephew or my friends' kids, like the middle of winter, they might be walking on the beach and the kids like shoes and socks off, running, splashing. They're not afraid like we are.
And they want it, because their little bodies are, like our bigger bodies are craving homeostasis, this balance, and their bodies know what to do. And if they get too cold, they'll say to you, can I have my coat? So we had 2, in our life, it was 2 children before we really got into the cold, and there was 2 children after it. So the first 2 children, like first time parents, we hadn't got a clue what we were doing, and like we were wrapping them up and put your coat on, you get cold, all that kind of stuff. The second 2, we had learned a lot, and it was just let them just run, let's see what they do. And like children don't want shoes.
Yeah.
They don't want a coat. You know, their little bodies, the core temperature is a little higher anyway. But yeah, it's when I was away with Wim Hof on an adventure once in Poland, most of them are in Poland in the mountains. I had a group. So Wim is there, and so I might have 25 people in my group and a couple of instructors, and Wim's keeping an eye on everything. So we were preparing them to go into, it was really cold, like the water was frozen solid. We had to cut a hole in the ice. So I'd been preparing my group all morning. We were doing the breathing, we were visualizing, we we're going up to the mountain, up to the mountains where the spot was. And as they are like using their breath and totally focused getting in, these local children run past us, jump in and jump out. We were just like, we need some of that.
Yeah.
You know, so as you say, it's instinctive in us when we're younger to be adventurous, to play, you know. And one of the things that kind of comes to me where we're doing, say, our Wim Hof retreats or workshops or whatever it is, or even at the sea, when people get out of the sea, they talk more. They're more playful. There's a bit more crack. You know, we've kind of let go of whatever we were holding beforehand. So that's another part of the cold. It just allows us to play a little bit more as adults. It's like officially sanctioned playtime.
Yeah. I will treat myself at some stage over the next 2 years and go to one of your retreats. I feel like I just need it, and I'm always talking about it. But can you tell us a little bit more about your retreats?
So yeah, our retreats they're in a magnificent place. So it's the Cliffs of Moher retreat. You drive to Lahinch, you drive a little bit further out to the Scanner, and then down this little boreen. And at the end of the boreen, there are these old farmhouses that have been there for maybe 100 years, and they're all, you know, beautifully redone. And at the back of the property, there's a studio, studio doesn't do it justice. So it's more like a sacred space. You walk in and one whole wall of it is glass, and it just looks down over the ancient fields and down onto the sea, into the Atlantic. And it is a special, special place. You've seen pictures of it online.
Yeah.
I've seen people walk into that space and just cry. You know, it's not everyone.
Yeah.
But it's that type of place. You know, something about the landscape being framed in the windows. So we're there, I think, once a month, most months down there for 2 nights. And there's a real sense of retreating. The minute you come over the gate, you feel like you've left things behind there. And it's just time to explore the cold and the breathing. And the food is all grown there and made there. It's all beautiful. They have amazing kitchen staff. But again, I think as adults, it gives us time. There's nothing else to do. All we have to do is get into the ice, into the hot tub, into the sauna. The sauna's outside, looking at down at the sea as well. But it's that time that people have. My intention is that when they could cross that gate again, when they go back out into their life, that they feel lighter, that they feel more open, that they feel more themselves, and they can take that feeling with them back when they go home.
And how many days is the retreat typically?
It's 2 nights. So we start the first day, we start about 5 or 6 o'clock, and then 2 nights, and then we finish about lunchtime the last day as well.
Nice.
And the food is all, as I said, it's grown there, but the food is the secret weapon. Like it is amazing.
Have you noticed? You're kind of, I suppose, on the front line in it. I know it's probably an overused word. With your full moon, the breathwork down in Killiney, the like hundreds and even thousands of people you're getting down there. We all see the increase in people sea swimming. Your retreats are, going from strength to strength. Are people coming in in a more stressed state? Have you noticed a difference in people over the last few years? Or
since COVID, there's definitely been a change. Say before COVID, we would have a real mix of people coming for different reasons. Now, at the beginning of our retreats, we'd have an opening circle where people just tell us what they'd like to get from their experience. And there's a marked difference, even though there's different reasons. Nearly everyone is saying that they need to reset, or they need to restore, or they need to come back down out of this very stressful kind of situation that they're finding themselves in. I just think since COVID, maybe the changes happened too quickly, or we're still dealing with the aftermath of COVID, or whatever it is. I'm in a kind of privileged position to see a lot of people talking openly about how they're feeling, and there definitely seems to be a very high level of worry in people, a very high level of tightness in people, a very high level of stress in people. And of course, you know, taking time to do some breathing, taking time to enjoy some cold and hot is one of the best ways of dealing with all of that stuff.
So I think we're coming to the end of the podcast. I have one final question that I want to ask you, but I think I already know the answer to this. So obviously our podcast is called The Patient Paradox. And for Fergus and I, the goal of the podcast is to uncover, in a world where medicine is becoming more advanced, why are people becoming more sick? So I want to ask you what you think the answer to that question is.
I think...
And do you agree with it?
I totally agree with it. I was looking for my phone. It's over there. I think technology is amazing. You know, it has changed how we educate ourselves. It's unbelievable. But I think that is also part of the reason why we are becoming more sick. I think our bodies and our minds and our brains have evolved over millions of years really slowly. And all of a sudden, the demands on our minds from technology are so quick, and we're not going to catch up. Our minds aren't built for them yet. So I think two things that people struggle with that lead to them feeling unwell and leads them being sick are these high levels of distraction and stress that we talk about, this constant distraction from one thing to the other, to the other, to the other, and a lack of time. And they're both connected. And I think technology is an amazing force, but we just are a little bit out of balance at the moment. I think we haven't really, we were kind of, maybe in 5 or 10 years, we'll have a better balance with technology where it feels like it's not pushing us into a place where we're so distracted. But I think those kind of factors of high levels of distraction leading to high levels of stress, leading to less time, I think that is a massive part of it's taking away from us our time that we need to recover. In the old days, there was this way to describe our nervous system when they were talking about that in our caves. You know, it's in the first book as well. In the cave, when we were hunter-gatherers, in the cave we were safe. So in the cave, our bodies could recuperate. We could eat our food and digest our food properly. When we went outside the cave, we were being hunted. We were hunting. And we were in fight or flight, and we were in these stressed moments, which we're built to deal with. We are really good at dealing with stress in short bursts. But we'd always have the cave, the sanctuary to come back into, to come down and to recover. And then we'd go back out again. I think part of the reason people are getting sick is because in the cave, we now have so many screens and so many forms of distraction that it's like we're outside the cave. We no longer have the sanctuary in which to recover. And I think something like a few minutes breathing or a few minutes meditating or just even walking on the beach becomes that sanctuary again. That's part of the solution then.
Niall, thank you so much for your time.
Oh, you're very welcome.
You're always such a calming presence, you and Josie, so it's always a pleasure to spend time with you.
Thank you so much for having me.